Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate and this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking. Nestling amid the shop fronts on a busy North London street is Bookbar, former bookseller Chrissy Ryan's dream come true of a bookshop and bar that encourages people to embrace the social side of the reading life. On a quiet Monday, we met up inside the newly decked out space and attempted to do an interview about her vision for Bookbar, her amazing lineup of book clubs featuring authors like Bennett and Sittenfeld, and the magic of deepening our engagement with books through having conversations about them. Inevitably though, we soon got distracted by the books themselves, and so listen in for some of our favourite reads and Chrissy's picks for the best books out now or coming soon. Listeners, before we start, have you ever read The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald? It's a fabulous read I highly recommend about a woman who starts a bookshop in a small Suffolk town that really does not want a bookshop. Among the many negative elements she has to contend with, the space she has rented for her shop turns out to be haunted by an unhelpful ghost known locally as the Rapper. I didn't manage to ask Chrissy about it at the time, but listening back to this recording I realised there is a recurring sound that may just have been the letterbox flapping in the wind, or, more excitingly, the Bookbar ghost trying to join our conversation. We'll never know. Anyway, back to Chrissy, who began with how visiting independent bookshops around the world gave her a sense of what she wanted to do with Bookbar.
When I had been working in publishing and selling books over the last decade, I had loved working with independent bookshops all around the world, and I was really lucky to get to go and visit lots of independent bookshops from Singapore to Sydney by way of Chicago. And what I discovered was that bookshops are inherently social spaces. There were lots of people who are buying books online mostly, young people who were shopping fairly locally and loved to support independent businesses, but might not visit their independent bookshop or even a physical bookshop because they maybe felt that if they weren't in the book world, it might not be a space for them. So I wanted to create something that was really, really social and that would bring people in regardless of whether you read a book a week, a book a month, a book a year, or a book a decade. I designed the space to be not just a bookshop, but a wine bar and a coffee bar, and an event space, a space where people can come and hang out and discover a love of reading or share a love of reading. And that is what Bookbar has amazingly already become.
For me, a bookshop is a happy place where I feel relaxed and just sort of joyful, really. But I think they can be slightly intimidating places, can't they?
Yeah, I agree. And I don't mean that to sort of say that is what independent bookshops are, because they are really social and welcoming spaces. I just don't always know whether people realise that. So I guess that's why combining those two things felt really important to me. I wanted it to feel really integrated, having seats amongst the books. So you walk in and there's books, but there's also, on your right, there's a display of books. On your left, there's wine and coffee, and you can see very clearly that there's a dual space going on. As you come up through the shop, there's integrated tables, books lining the walls, but the middle of the space is open for sitting and relaxing. And then there's a downstairs area that we're calling the book cellar, where you can go downstairs and there's more books, but there's also more seating. And I want that to feel kind of like a Parisian wine bar.
Starting a new business can't ever be easy, but you have also had to contend with starting a new business in the middle of a pandemic. How has that been?
It's been a learning curve. Unfortunately, I don't know any different because this is the first business I've set up. I think if I did know differently, it would have been very anxiety inducing, but I like to try and find the silver lining. And in this instance, the silver lining has been that it's allowed me to introduce things very gradually. Although it feels like a really bad time to start a business, I think somehow because of the nature of what I'm trying to do with Bookbar, people have really taken to the idea. Hopefully it would have always resonated, but I think that it has resonated in a different way because of the timing. People have spent the last year at home, missing their friends, missing their family, feeling isolated, feeling lonely, and are desperate for a social space and desperate to get out there and hang out. They've also spent more time reading. So it's the books and the social colliding. It feels like perfect timing for Bookbar to start.
And tell us about your background. You mentioned that you worked in publishing. You seem to really hit the ground running with this. You seem to have such a clear vision for what you want, and it feels very experienced to me. You're kind of looking at what you're doing.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. It doesn't always feel that way to me.
I was just interested in what you're bringing to it.
I started off as a bookseller at an independent bookshop, not dissimilar in size to this one, and I absolutely loved it. I was doing my master's at the time, and I was enjoying my master's, and I was kind of expecting to go down a completely different career path. I just loved bookselling, completely fell in love, like could not stop reading, could not stop talking about books, loved meeting all the customers. In this quite romantic way, I guess, fell in love with what bookselling is and found something that I was really good at and that I really loved. And from there, ended up getting a job with an independent publishing house. And my first job there was as the London sales rep, which meant that I got to go visit all the bookshops in London and sell books to them and talk about books. So I guess I just spent my entire life in bookshops. And then I was asked to head up the international sales for that publishing house, which meant that I got to do the same thing, but I got to travel the world doing it. So I would go to Sydney and work with our distribution partners there and visit independent bookshops. I got to go to Singapore and Chicago and Johannesburg and all around Europe and Dublin. I was so lucky. So it blended three of my favourite things then, travel, people and books. And again, I was just building up this experience of learning about what make independent bookshops tick and what make them all different and how it's so much about the personality of the people there and what they can bring to it. But I also wanted to create an independent bookshop that felt branded. It felt quite clear that I wanted it to be not my name in it, but something that could kind of evolve with me at its helm, but evolve independently of me too. It was bringing the things I know and love and I'm passionate about to Bookbar, but also I really want to build it independently of me too. So I guess maybe that's where the sense of vision comes from, is that I feel very clear on what I want Bookbar to be, potentially because of just seeing lots of bookshops around the world.
That sounds fascinating. I love the idea of your bookish travels. Brilliant. I was interested in your website, which is an absolute joy.
Thank you.
A time sink in the best and the worst way. As I discovered when I was browsing it the other day, and I meant just to look something up quickly, and half an hour later, Chrissy, I managed to tear my eyes away. You've obviously realised that your online presence is almost as important as your physical presence, and I can see that you've just put the same care and thought and energy into the website as you have the physical space. I was just interested in your thinking behind that and how you're balancing out the time, because that almost feels now like something people really have to consider. You know, anyone starting a business, it's sort of thing now, isn't it? That's part and parcel of running a business.
Hugely important. I'd say my biggest tip for anyone starting a business now, but particularly an independent small business, would be get online. Just get online. I honestly don't think Bookbar would be anywhere near in the position that it's in now, a month into opening our physical space for the first time, without having launched an online presence first. And I felt really clear about that from the beginning. There was never any question of launching a bookshop until I knew that the online stuff was working. Partly because you can do things online much cheaper than you can by setting up a physical bookshop, but also partly because I knew that there are lots of small businesses that do not have the infrastructure to be operating online. And I'm learning all the time as I go. I'd never had any experience setting up a website. I'd had a job running a bookshop where a big part of that had been writing blogs and managing the website there, but I'd never set anything up from scratch. And so to me, the first thing I thought about was the website and the Instagram. And in all honesty, that's where everything has started and keeps coming from. People turn up at the shop because they've seen my posts on Instagram. People order because I've recommended a book on Instagram and because they've enjoyed browsing the website, keeping it as something that feels very, very selected and is specifically chosen as something that we really recommend for our customer base. That feels really important. But also if they want to discover something, and that's kind of what Bookbar's all about as well, as discovery. It's that thing of sitting here as we are now with a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and having a conversation with someone and sitting there and going, oh, have you read that? And oh, that looks really interesting. And pulling things out of the shelves, and books being conversation starters and inspiring conversation and inspiring community.
That comes across very strongly, that sense of curation. And I was reflecting, that is the joy of independent bookshops, is that every single one you go to, you're getting an edit of books. You know, anyone can go anywhere and just find books. It's the edit that interests me. I want to see what books they've put on the front table. What are the books that they've got by the till? What are the books that they're talking about? That's the thing. And I think you've captured that really brilliantly on the website. It's got this really lovely sense of someone whose opinion you kind of trust, pushing titles into your hand to say, oh, I think you'd love this. You had a really interesting idea for putting together little bundles of books for people that I really like. Tell us about that.
That was one of the first things that I wanted to create. It's called the shelf-medicate service, and there are a couple of ways that you can engage with that. The first is called a shelf-medicate prescription, which is a bundle of books that is based on a theme or a mood that you can choose based on what you want to feel. And there are two reasons why I wanted to do that. I think the first ties into that whole thing of, I hope that as well as attracting avid readers, Bookbar is also attracting new readers and tapping into an audience who might use an algorithm, because that makes complete logical sense. An algorithm can say, you read that, you bought that, and so you might enjoy this. But what an algorithm can't do, I think, is do the kind of emotional linkage between books, which is what booksellers are best at. How did that book make you feel is a question that I ask a lot, or at least get under the skin of a lot. I might not ask it directly, but that's always what I'm trying to unpick when I'm selling a book. What did it make you feel? What do you want to feel? Rather than a plot detail or where it's set. So I guess the shelf-medicate service came from being the antithesis to the algorithm and saying, what sort of mood do you want to be in? Or what mood are you in? I also wanted to take away the fear of choosing what to read by hopefully creating something that meant that people can trust us, like you say. You can choose the gin and tonic for the soul, which are the kind of uplifting reads, or the armchair traveller, which are books that will transport you somewhere else entirely. There's lots of different moods and feelings and prescriptions that hopefully suit lots of different people. And from there, I then personally, or my team, select the books that are going into that prescription for you.
So people can pick the one that they feel suits their mood, and then you will actually fill in the books. It's not a specific little list of books.
No, exactly. So there's little photos on the website of what they might be, but honestly, I just try and choose as new things as I possibly can, so that there's no chance of you having read them, or things that I think you won't have read. But yeah, every prescription is different, every single one. I don't think I've ever done an exact duplicate, and we've done hundreds and hundreds of them. The other service that we offer is the shelf-medicate subscription service, a 6-month or a year-long subscription. Lots of other bookshops do them. I think the thing that makes ours really special is just how personal it is. And again, everything is totally chosen for you as an individual. So you come to Bookbar and have a glass of wine or a coffee with me or one of the team, and we then will find out about your reading habits and your lifestyle habits and just get to know you, basically. And from there, we'll choose a book especially for you each month based on our conversation. And it's kind of the best way I can describe it is like having a literary matchmaker on speed dial. You can keep in touch with us, or you can just let us roll with it. However you want to do it. It's your subscription and totally up to you.
And another way of connecting up people over books, of course, is book club. I always think there are two different kinds of book clubs. There are book clubs where the author's there, and there are book clubs where the author isn't, because you're going to have a very different conversation depending on,
completely
who you've got. You've launched a book club and you have some absolutely amazing authors.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. So tell us about that and how you arrived at those books and those authors.
We've had one book club so far, and our first author was Ingrid Persaud, who wrote the book Love After Love, which won the Costa Debut Novel Award. And it was just a brilliant evening. Tomorrow we have Clare Chambers speaking about Small Pleasures, which is her Women's Prize longlisted novel that really kept me going at times through that first lockdown. I've read it quite a few times just for its gentleness and wonderful characters. For our June book club, we have Brit Bennett speaking with us about The Vanishing Half. And that's just been shortlisted for the Women's Prize and has been one of those books that just really took off last year. And I feel so grateful that she's going to be part of the book club with us for June. And then the July author we have is Curtis Sittenfeld talking about Radden. I think lots of my customers, she is a favourite author. I think she just captures women and the changing role of women in society over the last several decades so well. And she's so sharp-witted and funny and wise. The way I select the authors is thinking about what can we have a really good conversation about. And also, because at the moment it's virtual, it has allowed us to reach these amazing international authors.
And do you think that's likely to continue? It does feel like there's a tiny silver lining culturally to COVID, which is that we do suddenly have access to people that maybe we wouldn't have been able to talk to directly before. And that's been a really nice thing.
Completely. It's been so interesting to see that develop. I launched the book club thinking I really want to do lots of events at Bookbar. That's not looking possible for the foreseeable future. And so I thought, well, let's launch it virtually. And I really expected 20 people to sign up. And we received 150 subscribers monthly, and that's just grown. So I suppose that also throws in the question of how do I make it not virtual now? Because the response from around the UK has been amazing, not just in London. Although we're all sick of doing Zoom calls and we can't wait to meet in person, to have a book club where you get the book 4 weeks in advance and then you can send in your thoughts and questions to me, and then I interview the author using those thoughts and questions. People continue to chat in the comments, and there's just a really wonderful dynamic that I was not expecting. I think that also allows people that might not speak up so much in a book club or feel overshadowed by people like me who just chat on and on. I think it allows people like that to feel included and to be able to have their voice. It also allows someone that might not be able to come to a physical space for whatever reason to have equal access. And it means that it's just less London-centric.
All good things. I was thinking as you're talking, we once interviewed Seb Amina, who edits the Happy Reader magazine, one of my favourite readers. And he was telling me about this book club where everybody read the book in advance, but then when they met, no one was allowed to mention the book. And the idea was that the conversation would be somehow informed by or infused with the spirit of the book, but that it wasn't actually specifically the book that people would be talking about. I thought you could have the best party in this amazing space. You've got drinks, you get them all to read something, and then they just come and chat.
I love
and you
that
see
so
what comes out of it. I would come to that.
I would as well. It's like, I've always thought that a really great book club would be, and I think these do exist, where actually you just had a theme. And you said, the theme for this month is
trees.
Travel or trees or whatever it might be. You could do something really niche. It could be mushrooms. I don't know, why that
actually
came to mind.
Kindness. I've just been thinking, I just did a little, for our newsletter, my theme this week was kindness, because the book I read, that was very much a thread. But I was thinking that would be quite a rich theme for, it was Leonard and a Hungry Pool.
Oh, which I've not read.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be amazing.
Interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, I mean, lots of people love it. I had my own thoughts about it, but I think it would be brilliant for book club, no question. Different people are going to react to it differently. And it brings up some really nice things to consider, which I was really happy and appreciated the fact that this was a book that really focused on those things, which normally are unnoticed and we do take them for granted. And it was lovely to have someone hold that up and say, look at the value in this. Until now this is what I needed. I needed someone to talk to about it. Because then you really start to crystallise your thoughts in a way.
Completely. I think that's what we all love about reading as well. And that is so what I wanted to do with Bookbar, was that, there's the kind of phrase goes, there's nothing better than curling up with a good book. I don't think that's true. I think it's sharing a good book and having that conversation. And I wanted Bookbar to be somewhere where you can just have all these conversations. Books are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the connection and the community that is created. And that's what book clubs do. I talk to people about book clubs all the time, as you can imagine. And I also do a bit of consulting for book clubs. It's a service that we offer where you can come to me and I can choose your book club every month.
Oh, great. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because we have the space downstairs, you can book that out for your book club. And part of that, if you'd like to, is that you can either choose the book yourself and then just let me know and I'll make sure that they're here waiting for you in advance so you can pick up your next book club at the current book club. Or I can choose the book for you or give you some options. And it's so funny because lots of people, when I talk about this, is sort of like, but we only actually really talk about the book for 5 or 10 minutes. We're not like serious book clubs. And I'm like, isn't that the point of a book club? There are book clubs where, yes, you spend an hour or an hour and a half talking about the books. But I think 95% of book clubs are an excuse for a gang of people to read a book. That's another thing that people like book clubs for, is that it means you read a book a month. And it takes the stress away from choosing what to read. You just are reading the book that the group is reading. But also, it's just an excuse to get people together and to drink a glass of wine or share a cup of coffee or whatever it might be. And just, again, books creating that community and having a bit of a gossip with your mates or maybe meeting some new friends. that is really what book clubs are about, as much as about the book, or potentially more than about the book.
My book club has been my only social event that I've had the entire of lockdown. It's been an absolute lifeline. Every month I've sat down on Zoom and I've seen people and we've talked about books, and it's been great. And I didn't really think about it before. It just was book club. But now I'm like, oh my God, it's like so important.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got that Patrick Radden Keefe book. I was just reading about that. Maybe on your website, actually. Empire of Pain, it's called, because I love the IRA one. My mind's gone blank.
I haven't read any of his other books.
Oh, it's so good.
The thing that really strikes me about Empire of Pain is I just find the whole Sackler family, the Purdue company, that whole story of the way that, medicine is in the UK, at least, isn't it? It's kind of like a public service. We have the NHS, whereas to have an industry that is about people's health actually be something that really is about wealth has created this really awful situation for millions of people across America. And I was really fascinated because I read a book called Dope Sick by Beth Macy, which should be on the shelf unless I sold it over the weekend, which is also like, oh, there it is. She was one of the journalists that first was reporting about the whole opioid crisis in America. That's an amazing book. I really recommend that. It won lots of awards. And so now this is kind of actually how integrated that family is. And it's had amazing reviews, hasn't it, The Empire of Pain?
Yeah. Say Nothing is the book about the IRA, which is extraordinary. It's non-fiction, and he is looking at a woman who disappeared. He's investigating that and trying to uncover what, in fact, happened to her in the end. So on the one hand, it's this investigation, but then it's looking at the broader picture of what was happening in Northern Ireland at the time. And I almost felt slightly guilty as I was reading it because I was enjoying it so much, because it reads like a thriller. But you're reading about such a serious subject. This was awful. People were going through terrible, terrible things. And it was fascinating to me. I thought it was such a good book. And it was funny, we were supposed to do it. Laura's book club did it, I think. But we don't always manage to record on every book club that we do. Sometimes we get a bit behind and we have to skip one. And so we never got to have the discussion about it. It's really frustrating because I would have loved to talk about it. But anyway, so yeah, Empire of Pain, when I saw that he got a new one out, I was like, because I just know he's such a good writer.
I love a non-fiction book. There's lots of styles of writing, isn't there? But I love particularly a book that manages to feel like a thriller, or, to have that momentum behind it, but where I also learn a lot about quite a serious subject.
Yeah.
Bad Blood.
Yeah, I saw that was below it.
Is another one.
Yeah, so we did do a podcast on Bad Blood. So I know a lot about Bad Blood, which we loved, and that made such a good book club book. Again, it's a story that you can't quite believe what you're reading. Elizabeth Holmes, this very charismatic, kind of nutty figure who managed to convince all of these people who didn't look too closely at what she was actually selling. She was promising this miracle blood testing system that would revolutionise medicine. So people saw big money as a result of that. And they didn't look too closely at whether or not it actually worked.
And it's amazing how much investment she got. So it didn't...
I think it was
Walgreens.
It was valued at $9 billion.
Yeah, they introduced clinics that are probably bigger than Bookbar is in their shops where you could come and get tested. And it was all complete and utter rubbish.
It never worked.
Yeah.
And at one point, I think one demonstration, it literally fell apart.
I think she believed her own lies. I think when she was saying, oh, we're nearly ready, even though they hadn't even started the work, I think she actually believed that not starting the work meant that because she had the idea, it was nearly ready. I'd say Bad Blood is probably one of the books that I speak with customers about the most, which says a lot for that style of non-fiction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And tell us, what are some books then that you've recommended for book clubs? What are the books that do get people talking, and hopefully they've got so much to say that they are talking about the book?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think Love After Love by Ingrid Persaud, which is our first book club, was one of the best book club books that I could recommend, just because there are so many strands to it. It's about a woman and her son who live in Trinidad, and they take in a lodger who becomes part of their family, and they sort of form this unconventional family unit. And it's set between Trinidad and New York, and it's all about different sorts of love. So whether that's familial love, or the family we choose, or the family we don't choose, the relationship between a mother and her son, or sex and romance and marriage, but also friendship, and also self-worth or lack of self-worth, and abuse that disguises itself as love in all sorts of forms. So there's kind of this tapestry from which to unravel and discuss things. And I think that's a really important thing for a book club book. actually it's less about how good the book is and more about how many things you can chat about. Would you agree?
I think so. You want things that are rich. You want things that have got lots of layers and threads that you can follow, and things that are going to spark debate. It's not so great, actually, if it's a book where everyone just agrees they liked it.
Completely.
And that's the end of the conversation.
And I think that's okay if people do, as long as there's enough for people to sink their teeth into in terms of the themes and things that it's brought up. I always say that I feel like book selling is one of the best jobs in the world for lots of reasons. But one of them is just how quickly you get to know someone on quite a deep emotional level.
Yes.
Because someone will come in and you'll start talking about a book and suddenly you know quite intimate things about their life that you wouldn't just share with a stranger.
Yeah.
But because you're talking about this subject matter that covers all sorts of walks of life and why someone wants to read that book and why they've read another book and the emotional impact it's had on them, you feel really trusted as a bookseller.
What are some books that you're just dying to press into people's hands?
The book that I press into people's hands a lot is a book called Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, which is a book that's been out for a few years, but it's one of the books that's had the most profound impact on my reading, probably, and one of the most profound experiences as a reader. And I just think it's a beautiful book. It's set in Japan about a Korean family who moved to Japan at the beginning of the 20th century, and it follows 8 decades and 4 generations of that family. And the racism, essentially, that they experience in Japan and the class dynamics between Koreans living in Japan over the course of that time, it feels simultaneously like one of the most epic things you'll ever read, whilst also being exceptionally intimate in terms of your relationship with the characters and the intimate details of their daily lives. There's lots of scenes with them cooking and there's lots of domesticity, but there's also the huge swathe of the politics happening over the course of a century nearly. So it's an incredible book and a complete masterpiece, I think.
I'm curious, what is it about it then that you feel changed you as a reader? Just how much it stayed with you?
How much it stayed with me, but also I think that was one of the first books where I sat back and realised that I love reading about people in the same way that I love speaking to people and learning about them. The more vivid a character is, the more I learn about them. And I love reading stories set somewhere that I've maybe never been or about something that I don't know a lot about, and using fiction as that way in to something that I then go on and learn more about. So to do that through, even though it's a fictional lens, to me is really attractive. And I think that was probably the book where I realised that.
Any others that you really love?
Lots. I am really excited about a book called Fault Lines, which is by Emily Atami, and it is set in Japan in the present day, and it's about a woman who had big career ambitions. She wanted to be a singer and instead got married and had 2 children, and she loves her husband and she loves her children, but she feels unsatisfied. And when she meets this charismatic restaurateur, she has an emotional affair. The best thing about it is its wit. It's very funny and quite revealing. You see a lot of yourself in this character, I think. But also, it's amazing on contemporary Tokyo. I've never been to Tokyo, but I feel like I have, because she just conjures this incredibly vibrant city, and the food. There's just so much amazing food. I love it in a book, and it's the same with Pachinko, I think, where you get the vibrancy of a place on the page, so much so that you feel you've been there.
You're very good. I totally want that now.
It's so good. It is so good. I highly recommend it. The one that I keep pressing into everyone's hands, regardless of who they are, is Detransition Baby.
I haven't read it yet.
It's honestly a really special and important book in lots of ways. For those who are listening and haven't heard about it, it's the first book by a transgender woman to have ever been longlisted for the Women's Prize.
And it was quite controversial, wasn't it, when that happened?
Yeah, sadly, there was some backlash about that. And I can't imagine what that must have felt to have been like for Tori Peters. But it has meant that people have discovered it. And I was so sad when it wasn't shortlisted. I honestly thought it should win. I think the thing that it does very cleverly is deals with a subject matter that has a lot of different perspectives and a lot of deep emotional things going on in the subject matter, which follows the main character is a transgender woman. Her ex-girlfriend has detransitioned and has got his boss pregnant, and they invite her, the main character, to co-parent with them. So it's quite an intricate plot that also has quite a lot of perspectives in terms of thinking about what detransition means within the trans community and in the cis community. And I think there's just a lot to think about, but it never does it lightly. It never shies away from those things, but it also does it with such a lightness of touch, which I think is an amazing craft. You rarely see that deep emotion, lots of things to think about, with this humour and wit that never undermines the seriousness of the things it's making you think about. And it's brilliant on sex and the way that sexual intimacy and emotional intimacy aren't always the same thing. There's lots of other things to think about outside of the initial plot. But yeah, it's just funny and wise. It reminded me a lot of reading a Meg Wolitzer novel. The Female Persuasion, for example, thinks about the changes in feminism over decades, in its essence, I suppose, which is, again, quite a weighty subject matter, but has that humour and that warmth and that charm. I would also maybe compare it a little bit to Curtis Sittenfeld in the wittiness and the sharpness of it. So yeah, for me, that's a really clever, funny, charming and important book.
And I can see you've got it in the window there next to 3 bottles of rosé.
Yeah, exactly. Rosé and Detransition Baby. Yeah. What a combination.
It's got this quite vibrant pink cover, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The other book that I have been recommending a lot is China Room by Sundeep Sahota. He was shortlisted for the Booker Prize for his...
The Runaways?
The Year of the Runaways.
Year of the Runaways.
Exactly. I've not read that. But this book, China Room, does something I really enjoy as well, which is a dual narrative between present day and history. It's about a man who's in his early 20s or late teens, and he's, in the present day, struggling with alcohol and drug addictions. And so he leaves his home in the UK to go and spend some time with his uncle in Punjab. And there he goes and lives on this crumbling farm that his family used to live in. And his grandma moved to when she got married. And then you get his grandma's perspective. Back in the 1920s, she's married in a single ceremony as one of 3 brides marrying 3 brothers. And they never know which brother that they've married. They just get visited in the night by one of the brothers and they don't see who it is. Yeah, that is quite a difficult read in that sense. But it's great because you've got the overlap between him being in this crumbling version of the house, overcoming his own demons, and her living in this house and everything being new, and she's trying to figure out which of the brothers is her husband. And I just thought it was brilliant. It's a short book, it's one that you'll whiz through, but it packs a lot of punch. And I loved, again, the setting of Punjab. I really enjoyed that. And then I'm also very excited about Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which has been described as the book that would have been if Nora Ephron had written The Bell Jar.
I've never read The Bell Jar, so...
Well, so it's got that kind of... It's about the premise is that it's about a woman who, when she was in her late teens, she begins to show signs of experiencing this unnamed mental illness. And it's about her grappling with that over the next few decades. It's so good on the way that a mental health battle can be so consuming and can have such a massive impact on your life. But it's also just brilliant on family, and it's funny and it's sharp. There is a pinch of Nora Ephron there for sure. But The Bell Jar, in the way that The Bell Jar is about mental health, I don't know how autobiographical The Bell Jar is, but I suspect there's elements of Sylvia Plath's life there. It's a really brilliant way of confronting mental health for a modern reader. Sorrow and Bliss. Yeah, I loved it.
I've got that biography of Sylvia Plath, Red Comet. It's supposed to be absolutely incredible. I just had not read a bad review. Everyone was raving about it, and I loved.
It's from a few years ago.
It's not. My version's hardback, and I got it at Christmas, so I don't think it's out in paperback yet. But it is very big and thick. Yeah. It's like, I think 800 to 1,000 pages. I will read it because I do like that kind of thing, and I will go from knowing nothing about Sylvia Plath, where I know one thing, the thing, to knowing I suspect everything about her. But I haven't got there yet.
It's so funny the way that we have so much knowledge in our heads about lots of things, and then we're not able to. I'd love to read a massive biography of Sylvia Plath. I don't know how good I am at remembering things. I think that's also why I like reading something non-fiction a real story or something that feels real, or I learn about something through fiction, because I weirdly remember that better than with non-fiction. I have to kind of mark off and like almost intentionally make notes and things so that it goes into my brain a bit better. That probably says a lot more about me as a reader. I think that's just the way my brain works.
Well, as you say, those conversations, I can talk incredibly fluently about books we've done for the podcast, where I've had a chat with Laura and I've talked to my book club and, I've really thought about them a lot. Whereas the Rónán Hession that I read last week, I can't actually remember how it ended.
Yeah, because you haven't formulated your thoughts yet. The other one I should shout about, finally, is Conversations on Love by Natasha Lunn, which is coming out in July, and is the most beautiful book in which she interviews lots of different people, from Alain de Botton to Dolly Alderton, by way of Esther Perel and Stephen Gross, about differing perspectives on love and the wisdom, because there's just lots of wise people that she's speaking to, and she crafts the interviews so well, and there's just so many gems. Anytime we're having any conversation with my flatmates at the moment, I have to run away and go and get my proof copy to dig up some element of wisdom that I want to share with them, some pearl. So that's coming in July, and I'm really excited about that, because I think that's one that will resonate with me at different periods of my life.
That sounds really great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for these amazing recommendations, for letting me come here and be in this fantastic space and to have such a brilliant conversation about books and turn myself away.
Thank you so much for having me.
And good luck with Bookbar. You're clearly going to go from strength to strength, and it's just going to be really exciting to see how it flourishes.
Well, I'm very, very grateful to everyone who has visited, who has shared posts, who has joined the community along the way. And yeah, I can't wait to see where Bookbar goes too.
That's all for this episode. Books mentioned were Love After Love by Ingrid Persaud, Small Pleasures by Clare Chambers, Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, Bad Blood by John Carreyrou, Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, Fault Lines by Emily Atami, Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer, China Room by Sunjeev Sahota, Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, Red Comet by Heather Clark, and Conversations on Love by Natasha Lunn. Whether you want to visit Bookbar virtually or in the real world, you'll find everything you need at Chrissy's website, bookbaruk.com. You can also find her on Instagram at bookbaruk and on Twitter at Chrissy M. Ryan. On our next book club show, we'll be discussing The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, a modern classic that may or may not have become overshadowed by the film, starring Anthony Hopkins. What did my book club make of this Booker Prize-winning novel? Did it live up to our high expectations? What did Laura think? Listen in to find out. If you enjoyed this show, check out our website, where you can find our archive of shows to browse through, including episodes on Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Saugon and The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffet. You can also explore our library of book reviews and articles. If you'd like to hear more from us, sign up for our weekly newsletter, which comes out on Sundays and is full of reviews and recommendations to top you up with bookish inspiration for the week ahead. Sign up via the show notes, our website, or at the link in our Instagram bio. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, and on Twitter at Book Club RVW Pod. Or why not get in touch with us at thebookclubreview@gmail.com. We always love to hear from you. And if you're not already, please do subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what we do, take a moment to rate and review the show and help other listeners find us. But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading.